Good afternoon, this is Dr. Barney, and during today's session we are going to be talking about single system design research. Now specifically, over the next few minutes, we're going to introduce ourselves to the concept of single system designs and explore what this type of research is. We're going to talk specifically about some of the components of the single system design. Then we're going to talk about how we can graph some of our results in Excel for a more professional looking report. We're going to talk about how we can interpret some of our results, and we're going to wrap up our discussion by talking about some variations that exist in single system design research. Now, just as a bit of an introduction to single system designs, it's necessary to think back to research that occurs in the broader social science context. Most research conducted in the field of social science or specific to social work focuses on group design research. And basically what that means is that when we're conducting research, we're comparing the performance of two different groups. For example, in one research study, we might randomly assign some clients to an experimental group where they receive a treatment such as cognitive behavioral therapy. The other group would be assigned to a control group where they do not receive this specific intervention. And the purpose of the study would be to assess differences in depression levels that are produced as a result of the intervention or the lack of the intervention. This type of research we might term as being a true experimental design. With one case like this, it might be a post-test only control group design, once again, where some clients are receiving an intervention and some clients are not. Now, with group research designs, if we really wanted to implement a strategy like this at our agency, we have to question whether or not it would be possible or feasible for us. In many cases, in order to do something like this, it would take a lot of additional help and partnerships to make research like this happen. Consider, for example, all of the time that's required, all of the investment that needs to make this happen. It certainly takes a lot of money to be able to implement an intervention consistently, and also to be able to randomize clients into a control or an experimental group. Really, the list of considerations goes on and on. Not only do we have to consider all the practicalities of the research, but we also have to consider things like getting IRB approval, how long it would take to collect this type of data, the complicated data analysis that may be a result, and consequently, we would need additional help from other researchers or statisticians in terms of crunching some of these numbers and doing the data analysis. There's also time considerations, time commitments, and the list goes on and on. So again, to actually do group design research in this way, it becomes very complicated, and it's quite a big investment. That's not to say that it's not attainable for us as social workers, but it is a lot of work trying to make something like this happen. And this is where we get into single system design research. Single system design research is a type of research that allows us to compare the performance of a single system. And when I say and talk about system, this may refer to an individual person, so that can represent a single system. We might be talking about a group of people as a single system. We might be talking about a family unit, one family unit, as a single system, or an organization that we work with, and that organization could represent the single system. But again, what we're doing is looking at just one system, one client, one group before and after treatment to see if they have made any progress or if any change has been noted as a result of that intervention. The goal of this type of research is to encourage positive behaviors and reduce negative behaviors in that one client system and to document the results that we notice. Now, in terms of the components of the single system design, the first component that we need to be focusing on is the target problem or behavior. The target problem is the thing that we're trying to change. This is the outcome, the thing that we want to increase or decrease. In previous examples, I talked about depression. Depression is certainly something that we want to see decreased within a client system. This is similar to what we talk about in group research when we discuss the dependent variable. This is something that we would like to see changed as a result of implementing an intervention. Again, it's important to recognize that it doesn't always have to be a problem behavior that we want to see changed. This could be a strength, something that we would like to see encouraged. For example, as a result of taking cognitive behavioral therapy, a client might see some increases in self-esteem. So we would consider this a strength. Again, it doesn't always have to be focused on a problem. One of the big things that we need to consider, however, when we focus on a target problem or a target behavior is we need to consider how we are going to measure this specific target problem. Are we focused on changing behaviors? Are we talking about changing some of the person's attitudes, or maybe even changing the way that they think about a particular issue? So first we have to consider what aspect of the problem or the strength that needs to be focused on, and then we also need to consider things such as the frequency or the number of times that the problem or the strength occurs. We have to consider things like duration, so the length of time that problems might exist or occur in. We have to consider the interval, so the length of time between incidents, or we could also consider the magnitude or the intensity of a problem. So these are all questions that we need to ask and investigate when we consider the target problem that we would like to focus on with the individual client or the client system. The next thing that we need to consider is the treatment. The treatment is equivalent to the independent variable in many group design studies. So in the previous example that I discussed, I had mentioned how cognitive behavioral therapy could be used to decrease depression. That's the independent variable in group design research. In single system design research, we simply talk about this as being treatment, and it's not treatment to reduce depression across a large number of people or a large sample of individuals. Instead, this is treatment being used to change an outcome or a problem behavior in one individual client system. It is necessary to obtain evidence that the treatment has helped a person or that it will help a person, and that's exactly why we document single system design research in this way. It's also necessary that when you write up some of the results that you consider and that you provide a very thorough description of the treatment that you utilize with your client system. So all of this information needs to be considered and documented. Another important component of single system design research is the phases of research. Now, at a minimum, single system design research has to include an A phase, which is the baseline, as well as the B phase, which is the treatment phase. As part of the baseline phase, the researcher considers how much of a behavior is engaged in before treatment takes place. So how much of the problem behavior or the strength is engaged before an intervention is actually implemented. During the B phase, or the treatment phase, the researcher then considers how much of the behavior is engaged in while treatment is taking place. Now, one of the big questions that we need to address is, why is the A phase needed? Well, really, when we consider group design research, we use an experimental group and we compare that with a control group to make sure that the results truly are a result of the intervention itself. In single system design research, the A phase is roughly equivalent to what goes on in the control group during group design research. So what we're doing during the A phase is investigating how much of a behavior is engaged in before an intervention, and then during the B phase, how much of that same behavior is engaged in while the intervention is going on. We can refer back to our previous example to help illustrate this concept even further. In our previous example, we've talked about how a clinician can use cognitive behavioral therapy in order to help decrease levels of depression. So let's consider if we were going to do this as part of the A phase and B phase of single system design research. As part of this example, the clinician would record the depression levels of a client each week for 3 weeks. There's a number of different ways that a researcher could do this. They might use a shortened version of the Beck Depression Inventory and take measures of a client's depression each of the 3 weeks before the intervention actually takes place. And then once the treatment begins, in this case, cognitive behavioral therapy, the clinician would continue to record the levels of depression during the treatment phase that the client is experiencing. So then after the research has, or after the intervention has successfully been implemented, and once the intervention has stopped, the researcher would then be able to compare the results from the A phase to the B phase and see if it really was the intervention that produced some of the results or the changes in depression that you might expect to see. Now let's think through another example research question just to help provide us with even more illustrations of what A/B design single system research might look like. First off, we might start with a broader research question. Something such as, if HIV positive African American females who have difficulties taking their antiretroviral medications participate in a medication support group as opposed to not participating in a support group at all, which will result in greater medication adherence. Okay, so that is the broader field of research, and certainly a very important area of research to be investigating. In the United States right now, there is an increase in the incidence of HIV/AIDS among African American women. So we know that this really is a significant problem. Another problem that is often encountered in the field of HIV/AIDS has to do with people taking their antiretroviral medications on time, every time. With HIV/AIDS, there is no cure. However, there is treatment that's used in order to help build healthy white blood cells that can fight infection, and there is medication that is used in order to help suppress the viral load that's experienced within clients and individuals with HIV/AIDS. However, one of the problems with antiretroviral medications is that there are a lot of side effects that can occur, and there's also the risk of virus mutation if a person does not take their medications on time every time. Even if a person misses one dose, it is possible for the virus to mutate and become resistant to the medications that a person is taking. So the problem is that once a person goes through the entire range of medications that are available to them, if they experience this problem of virus mutation, where the virus is then resistant to HIV/AIDS drugs, antiretrovirals, then they might not be able to take the treatment any longer, and there's nothing to stop the virus from replicating in their system. So really this is a big problem. How do we get people to continue taking their medications on time, every time? There's a number of possibilities that exist for something like this, but in this particular research study we might be interested in investigating the usefulness of a support group. So this is our new intervention, a medication support group, and we're interested in seeing if this might help increase medication adherence. Again, adherence being taking medication on time, every time. So that could be a broader research study. But let's take this a step further and assume that we have one single client who has problems adhering to their medication, who has problems taking that medication on time, every time. How could we turn this into a single system design research study where we investigate whether a support group would be helpful in or with that one individual client? First off, we have to identify what the independent variable is, what the treatment is, and we have to focus on just one. Certainly, a support group isn't the only option, but this would be the one that we would want to focus on in this single system design study. The next thing that we need to consider is what the dependent variable is, or what the outcome is. We also have to consider how it's going to be measured. We could use a scale in order to help assess a person's adherence to medications, or we might do something a little bit more simple, where we monitor a person's behaviors. We could, in this instance, just count the number of pills that were taken on time, or the number of pills that were taken when they were supposed to be taken. So we've got our treatment, we've got our outcome. The next thing we have to consider is the A phase and how that's actually measured. The A phase, once again, could be a period of time before any sort of support group is initiated. And this is when we would want to count the number of pills that are taken on time every time before a person participates once again in the support group. During the B phase, this is when the support group actually occurs, or the time frame when the support group occurs, and we would want to continue during this time counting the number of pills that were taken on time every time. Next thing that we would need to do is then actually develop a hypothesis, or identify what we are expecting to see as a result of this intervention. And what we're trying to see is actually an increase in this case in the number of pills that are taken on time every time. So this could be a very successful single system design project that can be implemented very quickly in the office of a clinician. Now that we've identified the components of the single system design research and what will actually be occurring during the A and B phases of our specific example, we need to consider how we might graph our results. And graphing our results is necessary in single system design research because this is how we provide a visual representation of the data that we collect during the A and the B phases. Now, when we graph single system design research, there are two important items to highlight. The first is the horizontal line, commonly referred to as the x-axis. The x-axis should contain our measurement time intervals. These measurement time intervals are determined by the researcher or by the clinician. These could represent hours. They could represent days, they could represent weeks or months. It all depends on the research question that the researcher or the clinician is focused on. The vertical line, on the other hand, is commonly referred to as the y-axis and should contain our dependent variable measurement. This is the target behavior that we want to change, and it's a count of the number of the dependent variable, or the target behavior that we observe at each time interval. Now, when we graph our results, we need to make sure that we include both the A and B phases on our graphs. So during the A phase, we are considering how much of the behavior was engaged in initially in the absence of treatment. During the B phase, we want to consider how much of the behavior was engaged in while treatment was actually occurring. During each of these phases, we need to make sure that we're including at least 3 data collection points. It's ideal to include 5 to 10 data collection points for each phase, but at a bare minimum, we want to have at least 3 data collection points. And it's necessary to include all of these data collection points because we want to make sure that we're able to observe trends in the data. We want to see if there is stability in terms of our target behavior, so a horizontal line where the target behavior has stabilized. We want to make sure that we're able to identify increases and decreases in target behavior as well, where there is a steady trend upward or downward in our observations. We also want to make sure that we're paying attention to unstable behaviors as well, or that we're able to identify when unstable behaviors are occurring. In terms of our example, if we were to graph some of the data relating to the number of correct doses taken by a client, we would want to make sure that we include both the A as well as the B phases. And you'll see on this graph, the A phase is represented by a blue line, and the B phase is represented by a red line. Both of those lines have been correctly identified in the right-hand portion of the graph. You'll also see that the x-axis has been labeled correctly, and this represents the time interval in days. The y-axis has also been identified as the number of doses taken on time by clients. So again, what you're seeing is that during the A phase, there are a low number of doses that are taken on time, but then during the B phase, there are a higher number of doses that have been taken on time. Now that we've explored some of the required components of a single system design graph, it's next important to explore the way in which we can produce one of these graphs in a way that looks professional. So one of the easiest ways to do this is by using Microsoft Excel. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a copy of Microsoft Excel, and I'm going to specifically open a blank workbook. And what we're going to want to do first off is select the cell in column A, row 1, and I'm going to type in the word baseline. This represents our baseline phase. The next thing that I'm going to do is enter the data that I collect for each of my time intervals under the baseline phase. So here I'm going to type 1, which represents 1 pill taken during day 1 that was on time when it was supposed to be taken. During day number 2, I'm going to report that 2 pills were taken on time when they were supposed to be taken. Back during day number 3, we're down to 1 pill taken on time, and during day number 4 we have 2 pills once again that were taken on time. This information represents the baseline phase. Now what we're going to do next is select column B, row number 1, and we're going to type in the word treatment to represent our treatment phase. But instead of beginning by typing our information in cell number 2, we are going to move the cursor down because we don't want any overlap in our data. And what we're going to do is in the cell immediately after our final cell in the baseline phase, we are going to start typing in some of our data collection points here. So in our treatment phase, we have 5 pills that were taken on time when they were supposed to be taken. Then we're to 6, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again, this represents the treatment phase. Again, making sure that there is no overlap between these sections. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to highlight all of our data. And the way in which we do this is by left-clicking on all of the information and dragging the cursor to make sure that we have all of our information highlighted. Then in order to create our graph, what we're going to do is select the Insert tab. Once we've selected the Insert tab, we are going to go to the Charts section, which is located right here. And we are going to select this icon here, which represents a line graph or a line chart. We're going to hit the little drop-down arrow, which gives us a number of different options to choose from. And the one that we are going to select for this project is a line with markers. I'm going to go ahead and left-click on this option, and what you're going to see is a copy of the table or a copy of the graph that corresponds to the information that was collected is populated in the middle of our screen. Now that the information has been provided to us, what we can do is add some labels to our graph. And the way in which we add labels is by clicking on the little plus symbol that's included here, which refers to some of our chart elements. And what we'll do is we'll click on that plus sign, and the elements that are included that we would like to select include axis titles, because we need to make sure to refer to the Y and the X axis. I'm actually going to take off my chart title. I don't need to represent that there. And that should be enough. You'll see that the A and the B phase, the baseline and the treatment phase, are already labeled for us. Another way in which we can do this is by clicking on the drop-down menu here, or we could also go to Quick Layout for some more options in terms of how we would like to represent this material. But for our purposes, these elements are enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the axis title. I'll highlight all of that information, and I am going to type in the information number of doses taken on time. That's the label I'm giving to the y-axis. And for the x-axis, the title that I'm going to be providing is time interval. And in parentheses, I'm writing days, so we know exactly what each of these numbers refers to. And now our graph is complete. And if I would like to, what I can actually do is left-click on this graph, right click, we can hit copy, and this will actually be ready to paste into PowerPoint, a Word document, or wherever we would like to use this information. Now, one thing that I would like to note is that for those of you who are using slightly older versions of Excel, the ways in which we label our graph looks a little bit different. What you'll actually want to do is under the Layout tab in Excel, you're going to want to make sure that you click on the option that says Access Titles, and you are going to choose the primary vertical axis title using the rotated title and provide your information in that way. For those of you who have been assigned a set of activities to complete along with this video, this would be a great time to pause the video, take a moment to review the case study that's provided on your activity sheet, and complete activity number 1, where you are asked to provide a graph for the data collection points that are provided for you on that activity sheet. All right, once our data has been represented in the form of a graph, it's necessary to evaluate our results. And basically what we have to do is inspect the data and provide evidence of the effectiveness of the treatment. And there are 3 important ways in which we can provide evidence of the effectiveness or the lack of effectiveness of the treatment that we use with our clients. The first is through an examination of a change in means. The next by is examining levels of performance. And the last way in which we evaluate our results is by looking at trends in performance. So the first way we evaluate results, the change in means. This is when we examine the difference between the baseline mean and the treatment mean. So in order to do this, what we have to do is first calculate the mean of the data collection points experienced during the baseline phase. So we will want to add together 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 2, which brings us to a total of 6, and divide that number by the number of time intervals. So 6 divided by 4 gives us a baseline mean of 1.5. The next thing that we're going to want to do is calculate the mean for the treatment phase. And for this, we're going to want to add together all of our measurements taken during the treatment phase. So we're going to add together 5 plus 6 plus 5 plus 6 plus 7 plus 8 and divide by the number of data collection points, which is 6. And that brings us to a treatment mean of 6.16. Basically what we're looking at is the average number of doses taken correctly or on time every time during the baseline phase is 1.5. The average number of doses taken correctly during the treatment phase is 6.16, with an average difference of 4.66. So what we're seeing is quite a difference between the baseline and the treatment phase in average score. So we would want to make sure that we write this up in a results report where we examine this data. And the way in which we could write this up is providing a simple statement which says that the average number of antiretroviral doses taken on time during the treatment phase, and then in parentheses we say 6.16, was much higher than during the baseline phase, and in parentheses we document 1.5. You could follow this same pattern whenever you were trying to document the change in means that you notice in your results. A second way in which we can evaluate our results is by examining levels of performance. And level of performance simply refers to the difference between the last baseline data point, so the last data point in the blue phase or on the blue line, and compare this to the first treatment data point or the first data point on the red line. So it's really the difference between the last baseline data point, which was 2, and the first treatment data point. The level of performance difference in this case is a change of 3 doses taken correctly or on time. And we would write up our results using the following pattern. We might say that the number of antiretroviral doses taken on time during the first day of treatment was greater than the number of doses taken on time during the last day before treatment started. Again, this provides us with an example of how to document levels of performance, and this is the same type of pattern that you would follow when documenting results with other clients and when examining other types of outcome variables. Now, the final way in which we can evaluate our results is by examining trends in performance. Trends in performance focuses on consistent increases, decreases, or stability in treatment performance. So basically the way in which we calculate the trend in performance is by dividing the treatment phase in half. And what we would want to do is calculate the average for the first half of the treatment phase and compare that to the average of the second half of the treatment phase. So if we look at our example data, what we find is that the first half of the treatment phase includes a 5, a 6, and a 5. We would add these numbers together and divide by 3, giving us a treatment, the first half of treatment being an average of 5.6. The next thing that we would want to do is examine the average of the second half of treatment. So we would add a 6 plus a 7 plus an 8 and divide by 3, which gives us a total of 7. And basically what we're seeing is that there is an increasing trend. So the average number during the first half is 5.6, and this increases to an average of 7 during the second half. What we can do is actually plot these points on our graph, connect them to determine whether or not the line increases, decreases, or is stable. And we could write up our results in the same way. The average number of antiretroviral doses taken on time during the second half of treatment was higher than the first half of treatment, indicating consistent increases in the number of doses taken correctly during the treatment phase. So again, we're just documenting whether there was an increase or a decrease or a stable line during the treatment phase, which indicates the trend in performance. You would document the same results for your study or with your client and your specific outcome variables to help evaluate your own results. Now, what is available to a researcher is the possibility of describing trends not only in the treatment phase but also in the baseline phase. You can examine whether there was an increase in a problem during the baseline, whether there was a stable line during the baseline, or whether there was a decreasing problem in the baseline, and try and compare that to what's going on in the treatment phase. But this is typically reserved for more complex studies where you have a larger number of data points during the baseline phase, not required for all studies. And for those of you who are completing the activity along with this video, this would be a great time to pause the video and complete activity number 2 on your assignment sheet. Again, it is not necessary for you during this portion of or during this activity to complete an assessment of the baseline as well as the treatment phase. In terms of reporting trends in performance, just report the trend in the treatment phase. It's important to note that there are a couple of ways in which we can increase the rigor of a single system design research project. Let's explore some of these ways in which we can do this. One of the things that we have to question is whether it was really the intervention that produced the change in the outcome variable, or whether there was something else that might have been responsible for that change. In other words, how can we really be sure that it was the treatment that was responsible for the change that we saw in the A-B design? How do we know if it really was a support group that was having such an impact on the number of doses that our client was taking on time every time. One of the ways in which a researcher can investigate this is by actually taking the treatment away and using a second baseline phase. And this is commonly referred to as an ABA design. During an ABA design, what we're doing is just withdrawing that treatment. So we have our initial baseline phase where no treatment is used, the treatment phase where an intervention is introduced, and during the A phase, the second A phase, the treatment is then removed. And in our case, we talked about how there was low numbers of doses that were being taken on time every time during the baseline phase. Then during the B phase, we began to see a gradual increase in the number of doses that were being taken correctly. If we were to then remove the treatment phase, it might be safe to assume that the person would either regress back to where they were before, where they were taking a lower number of doses, or they would stabilize, so they would even out in terms of the number of doses that they were taking correctly on time every time. So this is one of the reasons why an ABA design would be used, again, just to establish and investigate whether it really was the treatment that was producing these results. And it's really important to examine the second baseline data and how that data is trended, whether it's stable, ascended, or descending, to help establish the treatment phase as having the primary effect on the outcome variable. Now, a second type of design that's available to the clinician or the researcher is what's known as the ABC design. This is also known as the changing conditions design, and we use this when we want to compare two or maybe even more treatments. So instead of having just one treatment phase, the B phase, which might include support groups, what we could do is include a second treatment phase, which is commonly referred to as the C phase, to see if that has an impact on our clients. This is especially helpful in deciding what will work for a specific client or what intervention works best for a client. And there are actually a number of variations that researchers can use in implementing an ABC design. What would be simplest would be to move from the baseline to a treatment phase to a second treatment phase, but in some instances, clinicians might use an ABAC design where they go from baseline to treatment 1, back to baseline, and then to treatment 2. But really, it's up to each individual clinician to decide how they actually want to go about conducting this type of single subject design research. Now, in terms of how this might look on a graph, we would construct this in pretty much the same way that we had for one of our previous graphs, where the A phase is documented using a blue baseline. Then during the B phase, we can use our first treatment line coded in a color like red, and this is where we identify something like the use of a support group. And then our C phase would be the introduction of a second treatment phase. And one potential treatment that we could use for something like this is motivational interviewing. And again, we would want to document things like change in means and trends in performance to see which intervention actually had the greatest impact on the outcome variable. Now, one final thing that we need to discuss in relation to single subject designs has to do with generalizability. Typically with group design research, what we're focused on is conducting research with a large number of people, comparing results across groups so that we can use our findings not only with the sample that we're investigating, but generalize those results to a larger target population. But with single subject designs, who do the results of the research really apply to, and who can we generalize this information to? Really, with single subject design, we cannot generalize beyond the one person who participated in our single subject design research. However, if we wanted to generalize some of our findings, what we can do is replication. And this is essentially where we repeat the single subject design with a number of clients. And when we begin to see patterns not only in one client but across a number of clients, this is when we might be able to generalize some of the findings. Now, when we do things like direct replication, it helps to establish whether or not this might be generalizable to other clients at our agency. And it also helps to increase confidence in the reliability or the consistency of the interventions that we're using. And then even beyond replication at our agency, which is direct replication, we can use what's known as systematic replication, where we apply the same treatments across different settings, across different practitioners, and also across a range of different problems.